Welcome, everybody, to our live stream panel discussion today. As we're going to get into a very interesting conversation that I'm sure you're all going to want to engage with, maybe ask your own questions, and learn a ton about the Trump's energy and tax policy 2025. We have amazing experts here today to help you get into the conversation and learn about what could happen, what may not happen, and everything else in between. So sit back and enjoy this. And by the way, this is all being brought to you today by our wonderful sponsor that's making it possible. And that is going to be the Dakota Ridge Capital. It's your green investment partner making this all possible today. In fact, we'll have one of the members of the Dakota Capital Ridge team here with us today. As our discussion goes on today, we want to invite you to join us in the chat box today. Add your thoughts or comments or questions, anything that you may have to add in of value to our discussions today. Please use the chat time. And then at the end of it all, we will have a special time of taking your Q&A questions and sharing those out as well. Also, we're going to have a little bit of fun here today. It's not going to be all serious. As we get into this today, we do want you to engage. We're going to have a special prize at the end for the person that's engaged the most through the chat box. We have 60 minutes to have a great time together, and the winner will get the Renewable Energy Finance and Theory and Practice. It's a free digital version of this. It's an amazing white paper, and you'll get it at the end. So be sure, engage, have a good time for us. But right now, let's get into bringing on our amazing panel that you're going to meet throughout the day here and really get to know a little bit better. First of all, we want to welcome into this program today, Neil Winward. Neil is the CEO of the Dakota Ridge Capital, specializing in renewable energy transactions with over 25 years of experience. And we're going to bring Neil in so you can see, there he is. Neil, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks, Rich.
And being here. Next up on our panel guest today, we have, let me make sure our slides are working. There we go. Laura Collins is going to be with us today. And I'm going to bring Lauren in right away and let her, there you go, Lauren, bring you in and have you join the conversation here today. Lauren is a tax expert specializing in project finance. She is the tax lawyer who can do complex spreadsheets as well as the tax law, basically obliterating your investment bankers. She's a pro of the pro. Lauren, thanks for being with us here today and joining us. Coming up next, we are going to have Russ Sullivan with us. And let's have Russ pop on. Well, our slides are having difficulty today. Bear with us on that. And there's Russ. Russ Sullivan is going to be coming on the screen here. And where'd you go, Russ? There you go. Too many boxes, too many people. Russ, great to have you with us today. And he is the expert in the federal policy and U.S. tax law, with over 14 years of experience on the Senate Finance Committee. Russ is also a Democrat. He's a Democrat lobbyist who loves to speak in public. And right now, he's like the ice cream van in the heat wave. It's a world of change on the Hill right now. We'll probably hear about that as well. And finally, we're going to bring our amazing guests in from this panel. And Santosh is going to join us today. And he is Santosh Raikar, is the managing partner of Silverpeak Renewable Investment Partners. There are 20 years of experience in energy and infrastructure project finance. Santosh is well known just by his first name. He's kind of like the Cher of the group. That's how you want to treat him today. Thanks for being with us here today, Santosh, and being part of our panel. So let me get this thing rolling here because we have a lot to cover in this hour. And first of all, we're going to go to Russ and talk about the energy and tax policy. And first of all, let's just get this whole big thing going by what's really going on, what's at risk, what's at stake here. Where do we start, Russ?
Well, we start with tax because on the tax side, we are going to have changes in laws in 2025. Regardless of whether Congress acts. Now, we all know Republicans won the election, and we all know elections matter, and they dictate what policy options are on the table. And so, sure enough, Trump won. The both houses of Congress are controlled by Republicans, so they're going to want to cut taxes. Really want to cut taxes across the board, and they're going to spend 2025 trying to do that. If they fail, then taxes are going to go up on everyone, because the TCJA tax bill in 2017, which lowered tax rates for individuals and pass-through entities, it expires December 31st, 2025. So if they're gridlocked and can't pass a bill, everybody's taxes are going up. So guess what? They'll figure out a way to pass a bill. And they're going to begin working on that. They have already begun working on that behind the scenes. Now, what's that tax bill going to do? Principally, it's going to focus on extending all of the TCJ provisions. That's the rates for individuals. That's the credits for the child credit. That's the estate tax exemption amount. It's the standard deduction for individuals, but it's also 199 Cap A, which is the deduction for pass-through businesses, and many in the energy sector are structured as pass-throughs. So that's a very important provision that lowers the effective rate. Second, they are going to look at some of the Trump ideas from the campaign. You may have heard about Trump saying, hey, I'm going to basically end taxation on tip income. And that's exactly what they're going to do somewhere in the bill. And then finally, he's got a proposal aimed at promoting manufacturing in the U.S., a 15% corporate rate. So we're not just talking about pass-throughs, but the corporate rate. And the question is, what is a manufacturing entity? And does energy qualify or not? So we're going to have that debate going along this year as well.
So what is the rest of the panel? Just as you heard Russ lay it all out there, where does the panel want to start here today?
Well, maybe, Lauren, it would be a great time for you to sort of weigh in, because I think we all know that since the Inflation Reduction Act was passed, this has been a really fast train of new opportunity. You know, the tax equity market, which was maybe 20 billion before this, has doubled in terms of, transfers. So I'm wondering how people are feeling about that, how your clients are feeling about that, whether the deals that they did this year are causing them concern, whether it's causing people to sit on their hands for next year. What's the kind of runway look like, and how is this landscape of credits going to change?
Got any thoughts, Lauren? Oh, somehow we lost Lauren's microphone. So
while she gets that back, I will begin the answer and connect them for Lauren. And that is when you're passing a bill in Congress, you've got to, the general rules, you have to pay for the bill. So if you want to cut taxes or increase spending, you need to find offsets. Well, Republicans in general, one of the offsets that they would like to include would be either repeal or modifying these tax credits that Neil just talked about, all of the IRA energy tax provisions. And we have some Republicans who would like to repeal them in toto. And so we're going to have a debate on that as we move forward. And that gets into the issue of, will investors feel like there's enough certainty to move forward with projects?
Let's see if Lauren's got any thoughts. You back with us, Lauren? There is. Check the mute button on your dashboard down in front of you and see if the microphone icon accidentally got bumped. We'll troubleshoot that live. Okay, we'll have Lauren go see if she can figure out what's going on with that. But I do have a question here. Do you think that Trump's pick of the energy and interior new leaders of that will turn this whole thing upside down? Or will they prioritize gas over solar, over wind? What way do you think they're really going to go with some of that?
So I think that he has picked leaders who have demonstrated that they want the sort of all of the above and all the below. So they are going to focus on trying to get more fossil fuel production in the United States in various ways. So Governor Burgum, who's going to head the Energy Council overall, and the designees at Energy, Chris Wright and Lee Zeldin at EPA, they're going to take regulatory action, and they're going to propose legislative action to reverse many of the things that the Biden administration put into place, which have made it more difficult to explore for and produce oil and gas. And then they're also going to try to use the federal government's levers to try to increase the amount of production in the U.S. The designee for the Secretary of Treasury, Scott Bessent, said, part of our plan is going to be we got to produce millions more, gallons or barrels per year. And so he's set a standard that we've got to significantly increase the production in the U.S. to continue to be the global leader. So they're going to put forth some ways to do that, and I think that legislation will pass.
Do we have Lauren back with us now? Let's give it another try there, Lauren. Let's see if that mic pops on. It was working before we started. Okay, Lauren broke the internet. We'll keep working with Lauren and try to figure out. Check your computer settings and just see if the right mic is selected. Sometimes those things change. Oh, wait, I got something coming in there.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you now.
Okay, sorry about that. It has to happen to someone, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so thanks for bearing with me. I this is a great conversation. I mean, the IRA has been so transformative in the tax space and the renewable energy and clean energy transition. I mean, the past 2 years have been wild. I mean, Santosh, when did we start working together? Like a decade ago. And we were plenty busy chugging along, and then the IRA came out and just supercharged investment and project development. So it's just been incredible. And then, last month, as Russ laid out, there was a massive change in DC, and people have been worried. Admittedly, there's been lots of questions about what is going to happen, because as Russ described, there's a lot of pay-fors. And because the IRA has been so successful, it's kind of expensive. And it certainly has outpaced any of the projections that were made when it was first scored in 2022. So there is a lot of attention on whether the IRA is going to be something that is going to be carved back or limited in some way. I mean, I think our personal view at Vincent & Elkins is that we're not going to see a full-scale repeal by any means, but there are lots of areas where you can certainly expect there may be something that is carved back. There may be certain industries or taxpayers that may be more kind of subject to change. And so we're working with lots of clients to navigate that. And, even though it's created a little bit of uncertainty, it's actually made things even busier in the short term, as folks are really trying to figure out ways in which they can develop their projects and put capital to work this year and try to kind of stave off any sort of future changes next year.
Well, since we've got your mic working now, we'll just flip it over to you. Keep the ball rolling here with the tax credit transfers. How is the new administration going to do things? What's it potentially going to look like?
Yeah, so I mean, tax credit transfers is probably one of the bigger changes that came out of IRA. Essentially, being able to sell a tax credit unlocked tax capacity and new market entrants that previously were kept out of investing in clean energy and renewable energy assets. So it's an incredibly busy space. I think we see at Vincent & Elkins like a new tax credit transfer deal. It feels like one a week, if not more. We are, working really quickly to try to close a lot of those deals this year. Again, trying to stave off any future changes next year, and people trying to get those transactions done. Whether tax credit transfers are going to be impacted or on the chopping block with a new administration change, I don't know. I think anyone's guess is as good as mine. Maybe Russ's is better than mine, but I tend to think that tax credit transfers is an area that will not change under a Trump administration. Again, I do think it's possible that the underlying credits that are being transferred may be impacted, or the types of taxpayers that are able to transact may be impacted. But are they going to just completely repeal the tax credit transfer code provision? That feels highly unlikely to me. That said, people are worried about it again. So we are seeing deals that ordinarily you might have started working on for 25. People have pressed pause and are waiting till next year. They'll let the dust settle and see what happens.
So I was going to ask that.
Sorry, Rich.
Yeah,
just quickly for Russ. I mean, there's some inside baseball here, right? In terms of exactly what can happen and realistically by which date it can happen. So what is the first point in time next year when legislatively any changes to the credits that are already on the books could take effect?
Well, Congress can act whenever they choose to, but realistically, it's going to take at least a quarter and probably more before they could get in the position to actually pass tax legislation that could modify the IRA. It actually is more likely to take 6 to 9 months to get it done, but they conceivably could do that. The one important feature of any tax legislation, though, is what is the effective date. And Republicans in particular have been consistent over the decades to not change the rules and during the middle of the game. So they very likely will say, if we're going to change the rules, they'll be effective for transactions after the date of enactment. They actually may defer it even longer than that. And on these credits, many of which have a long tail, particularly the production tax credit, they will grandfather in the projects that have commenced construction by the date that they change the rules. So I think we're going to have a long tail on the credits, even if they make modifications to it. And the same would be true for the transferability provisions.
What about the, oh, sure, jump in, Lauren.
Yes, Russ, what do you make of this rumor that was floating around that there might be 2 reconciliation bills, one at the beginning of the year and then the tax saved for later?
Yeah, so this really just happened this week, Lauren. And here's the backstory. Senator Thune, the leader of Republicans in the Senate, suggested, well, let's do energy and immigration first because we're kind of united on the policy there. And let's save the tax, where the Republicans are not fully united on whether they should pay for it fully or not, and pay for it with what. Should they pay for it with tariffs? Should they pay for it by eliminating the IRA? Should they raise taxes on certain taxpayers? So they propose that, but the House of Representatives is a different body than the Senate, and their dynamics are different. And so the House responded even yesterday by saying, no, we really don't want to wait to get started on the tax bill. We want to start on that first. And so these are the kinds of issues that within the Republican Party, they're going to have to hash out before they decide their process.
Now, someone did mention the pregnant pause that's going along, that people are waiting for a decision. I'm curious, how long with this tax information and changes, how long can people wait to not move? Because there is a pregnant pause out there right now, as someone said.
Yeah, I mean, I'd be interested in Santosh's view on this. I mean, we're certainly seeing clients, if you have a project that's far enough along, you're pushing forward, and if anything, you're accelerating. If you have anything that's pretty early stages and just hasn't really kicked off, you are pausing. I do think you probably get to, spring next year and just see where things are sitting and make a go, no-go decision at that time.
Yeah, maybe I should interject here. Look, I mean, the 2 words that have garnered a lot of attention since Trump got elected are scalpel and sledgehammer. I think Google reported that. There are a lot of searches going on those 2 words, right? So the idea basically that is, percolating across the industry is that there will be, not many dramatic changes. I think that is somewhat wishful thinking. And again, this is my opinion. There are as many people as, there are opinions. So So the rationale behind the scalpel approach is because people believe that one, the House of Representatives is there is a pretty slim margin. 80% of the IRA money has gone into the Republican states, and variety of other things. But as we know, I mean, predicting what Trump is going to do is basically trying to predict an organized chaos, right? And I don't think we have machine learning software to predict something like that. But we have something to work with. For example, we know how Trump administration worked last time around, and that sort of thing. So people are saying that EV credits could be the one which could go away, but obviously now we have a X factor called Elon Musk. He's hopefully will realize pretty soon that the bromance is not going to last long, but that kind of puts into question like how this could be done. In my opinion, it's like a binary outcome. Either it is going to be, a true repeal, or they're just not going to bother about it, and then try to take care of some other ways. What I mean by that is there are so many priorities in front of the government, and again, I'm telling you an investor's perspective. I'm not into the way Russ or Lauren are ingrained into the whole system, but looking from outside into the system. So what I mean by one and zero is basically there are other ways whereby the Trump administration can potentially rake off. For example, by there is a possibility that there will be less administration or less auditing or less resources for the IRS, for example, on the table. So what does it do? Well, it does just delay things. For example, so direct pay, you could expect to get that paid much later. I mean, again, the Trump administration last time has been a mixed bag. On one hand, we didn't see, and I personally didn't see anything, and the industry didn't see any slowdown during the time 2016, 2020. It went along at a strong clip. But at the same time, there were decisions which basically led to, for example, delaying and offshore wind, for example. So that's the mixed bag. And from the investment perspective, then the approach is basically let's work with the known unknowns, and then format basically fork out the policy that you can work with, and that's what I see most of the investor community like ourselves do.
So let me ask this to the whole panel, because Santosh said this several times. The current administration, is this a repeat of the way Trump behaved and planned before? Or do you believe it's going to be a radical shift, that it won't be a complete repeat? There's new stuff, the way he's going to lead differently this time.
My personal view is that, it's going to be repeat for the most part. And, on the one hand, and but because the Trump administration the incoming one has had some time to think about it, and they have been a little bit more organized, this would be more organized chaos, like as I said. Unfortunately, Trump has a fairly poor record of delivering on the promises he makes, and we didn't get much out of it last time. It was just the TCJA so far as a big investor community is concerned. We are hopeful that he will do more than what he did last time, and can really deliver on the promises. There is a lot of credible stuff going on, credible people involved, but at the same time, we are seeing the repeat of some of the things in terms of the nominations and the confirmation process, and it looks chaotic as it was before.
What are the
So
rest
Russ,
of the panel?
could you maybe tell us when the confirmation process begins? I guess January 2021, right? That's when it begins. And how long could that theoretically go on? Is that a process that needs to be kind of in place before any of these legislative steps start taking place?
Yeah, the answer is no. They will make it happen quickly for the Secretary of Treasury and the key national security ones. They'll be done in a week. The other ones will take a little while longer, and then of course their deputies throughout the year will be at it. But look, those people are already working on things, and many of them will now begin being placed for temporary basis, working out of the executive branch, and they'll all come in on January 20th. So that's not the problem. The challenge will be making the decisions on whether they need to be budget conscious or not, and if so, what are they going to go after? Can they actually raise money by offering new government leases of property for oil and gas exploration and drilling? Yes, they can. Will they do that? I suspect they will. Can they get money if they repeal or modify these IRA provisions? Yes, they can, but I don't predict they will actually do a great bit of that. I agree with Lauren. I agree with Santosh that Trump doesn't change his stripes. He has the same philosophy. He's going to push for domestic research and manufacturing, and he's going to use whatever tools he can. The provisions that are at risk are, number one, the EV tax credit, definitely the most at risk, and then the refueling property tax credit under 30 Cap C. That's at risk to kind of go along with that. The next thing that's at risk is the prevailing wage and apprenticeship requirements, which people consider to be, burdensome and costly to comply with, and most everybody's paying prevailing wage in this sector anyway. So the Republicans may get rid of that. They will obviously not get rid of. They will try to keep the rate of the credit at 30% for the ITC, but that's possibly. And then the other big one that could affect things across a few channels would be trying to prevent China from owning enterprises that qualify for the credits and are a subsidiary of a China business that's actually controlled by the government. We have limitations in the EV credit already. I expect there to be limitations put on the 45X and maybe even many of the other credits as well, to preclude our foreign policy enemies from actually benefiting from the IRA. So those are the ones most at risk.
What about new things in as much as, we know that permitting and like the transmission queue is a disaster, right? It's sort of 4 or 5 years backed up for transformers and for connection of big projects to the grid. And the thing that Manchin kind of went to the mat for when the IRA was approved, which was permitting reform, there's a bill in Congress on that. Can we expect to see some opening up of permitting as part of this, and might that be helpful to bring projects forward?
They will try, but Neil, it's going to be difficult on the permitting because the Republicans are going to want to pass a bill with just Republican votes and just with Republican philosophy. Can't blame them for that. Democrats do the same thing when they're in power. But the budget rules require that if you want to pass a bill with bare majority in the Senate, in other words, 51 votes, then every provision in there has to have a revenue effect. It has to have an impact on the budget. It's not clear that all the permitting reforms will actually score as impacting the budget. So the things they can do in this expedited legislative process is things like get rid of the methane fee if they want to do that, because that lowers federal revenue. Open more lands to leases by the private sector on government property and forests, national parks, the North Slope, wherever they want to decide to do it. That will raise money for the government. So those are okay. But when we get into those just policy issues that are more like permitting process, those generally don't score. So they may have to just be aggressive in putting out law, which modify the process, ways consistent with current law to try to make it easier.
Let me get Lauren back in for a second. We kicked off with you. After hearing all this wonderful discussion, Lauren, what's your final thoughts on this part of our panel time?
Yeah, so I think my main takeaway is, I think if you're in the renewable space of the clean energy transition, the momentum is so great and it's so beneficial to, red and blue states across the country. Seems pretty unlikely that we're going to slow that down massively. And maybe there's some silver lining too in all of this. I mean, I hear, Russ, that there's a lot of impediments to some sort of permitting reform or those types of changes which make development better. But anecdotally, our clients are excited about that prospect. Our infrastructure clients and midstream clients do think that there's opportunity for quicker approvals and more opportunity to develop in that space. So, while there's reason to be hesitant, and I do think we'll continue to have this pregnant pause at least for a little while. Maybe it's not all as bad as we thought it was back beginning of November.
Thank you. Well, we got our next part to dive into now, the landscape for energy developers and investors. Santosh, we're going to go to you first, but I'm kind of interested. There's been a lot of talk about Bitcoin and how much everything's going to switch over to Bitcoin and everything's going to be done with Bitcoin if Trump has his ways. How much of an impact will that have? And do you think we're really going to go that direction?
Well, Bitcoin coin will be very interesting. We just reached the new landmark in terms of the price of the Bitcoin. There is already a lot of enthusiasm around Bitcoins, and there is a very good interplay between renewable energy and the Bitcoins. The whole move around data centers and all of that. So it will be interesting to see how far it goes, and there are certain tax implications that are going to be tied to back to the conversation that we just had. From the Bitcoin perspective, it will be a very interesting 4 years, and we'll have to see really how it would go.
What key areas were you kind of looking for from the Trump administration in this area?
I'm not much of a Bitcoin expert to be honest, but it's very difficult to really project because from the adaptability of the Bitcoin as would increase. We already have started seeing ETFs, for example, and there will be sort of reduction in the barriers. Some of the things that came out of Trump himself kind of makes sense in the sense that having it as a sort of a strategic reserve and other ideas that he has described. But again, it's very difficult to really project based upon there are no concrete policy statements behind some of the statements. So it's very difficult to really project what it could go to.
Now,
so Santosh,
Neil, go.
Yeah. So I know that Silverpeak is not although your particular part of it is renewable. I think that's a descriptor that brings in nuclear as well.
Yeah,
right?
I was going to talk about that.
And so I'm curious to know, with all of the big tech companies who've suddenly made nuclear be, the energy source du jour, whether you're seeing more energy, sort of deal energy focused in that sector. And so, nuclear and also natural gas, which probably is the most immediate way of fueling all of the growth in data centers and powering the implementation of AI. So is that something that your business is beginning to focus on more?
Yeah, so that's a very good question. So, as data centers have been the primary driver for electricity usage, and we are seeing the utility stocks, for example, doing much better compared to the traditional growth drivers and growth stocks. So the renewable energy, as because of the intermittency, has a natural disadvantage when it comes to operating or fueling certain things like data centers. But with the nuclear, the things the change, right? So I believe that we are in the new era of nuclear renaissance. However, we'll have to really think hard when it comes to seeing this project through. It does still take 10 years to build a project. So yes, there might be credits, there might be certain incentives, certain policy frameworks that could make some of these things easier. But would we see these 10 years down the line is yet to be seen. Some of these engineering and design and some of the other aspects that need to happen in order to make the nuclear projects work itself could take 5 to 10 years, right? After 2008, there was a lot of enthusiasm around nuclear power projects. There were several projects were announced. There were grant programs, but nothing really came out of it. I hope this time it's different, but I think on the nuclear, the challenge is on the technology side as well as the permitting and permitting side, the environmental aspects, rather than the capital, because the capital has always been there for projects like that, but the long tenure to and the gestation period that is required for something like nuclear has been the killer. So it has to be changed.
Okay,
What
Lauren, has Viennese seen any uptick in the number of nuclear or small modular reactor deals that have come to you?
Yeah, so the IRA included a credit for nuclear, but interestingly, it was really for existing nuclear projects. It didn't apply to any new development of nuclear projects. But we have seen those deals. We've seen tax credit transfers of nuclear tax credits. And that's exciting because it does still mean that we're seeing investment into that space, which can be used to upgrade and refurbish these projects and make sure they continue to operate in a safe and efficient manner. I think VNE has done 2 nuclear tax credit deals, which may be more than anyone else in the country. So they're out there, they're happening. And again, I think that's an area that's probably pretty safe going forward for all the reasons that you guys are mentioning.
And how about CCS, carbon capture and storage, and also the fugitive methane, the 45Z credits? That feels like it's a credit that's much more aligned philosophically with the incoming administration, and is definitely something you could see adding to the mix in terms of getting more of the natural gas and methane production facilities into the energy mix sooner. I mean that's sort of both you and Russ really, as to whether there's any sort of granular discussion of particular 45Z, Q, etc. in the mix at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, I think just this week we were seeing that House Republicans were asking industry stakeholders about 45Z, and we're trying to get more information about it and how it would impact the industry. So it does seem like there is some movement in DC to understand that credit better and make sure that it's something that is actually helping stakeholders. That's an interesting one, though, because it's only a 3-year credit currently, and we don't have any guidance on it. So that's been very challenging for RNG and clean fuels developers. I know there's been proposals to potentially extend that, which would obviously help that industry quite a bit. Russ, I don't know if you've got any insight, if that's got any legs.
Sure. I think the lack of guidance is problematic for the industry, and we're seeing effects of that. But I think that will drive Republicans, who have lots of representatives in the heartland and the ag country, who will step up then, and I suspect they'll take action in the tax bill to try to make 45Z work. They'll probably do it more for the farmers than for the energy developer part of it, but it doesn't matter. That's a nice coalition to get something done. The only thing that's safer than something for the farmers, it would be 45Q. I think 45Q is the safest of all the tax credits from the IRA. Of course, it pre-existed the IRA, and that's part of what helped, is that Republicans helped launch it originally. And so we could see even more expansion of 45Q, particularly in the utilization side of it.
Yeah,
What's
and
the
it
biggest-
bears mentioning, I mean, just yesterday we got regulations out of Treasury on the Section 48 ITC, and the RNG industry came out, very nicely in those regs. There was some really favorable guidance there. So that industry is doing a great job of lobbying folks in DC.
What does the panel think are the biggest danger areas that Trump could turn things upside down in this particular area? Well, where are the warning flags out there?
Yeah, from my perspective, I think it's what Russ mentioned earlier. It's restrictions on Chinese ownership. We've seen those proposals already this year. They're included in certain tax code section references throughout. So I think that's an easy area where we'll see those limitations added throughout.
Yeah, I would add offshore wind is going to be, could be potentially at risk, given that we have already seen several write-offs and delays and the PPA, renegation on the PPA. I think that particular sector is at risk.
Agreed.
I think the biggest risk really has to do with the budget hawks in the Republican Party, because if they really take a stand, just a handful of them, and say, "I'm not going to vote to either spend more money or to cut taxes or extend even existing tax credits," then Republicans have to look elsewhere in order to get what they want done. And that they one option is the tariffs, but they may reject actually imposing the tariffs by Congress and want Trump to take the heat for that. And that if they do that, then they don't really get credit for it under the congressional scoring rules. They could cut spending. I do think the IRA loans and grants programs are a danger zone. I think Trump will try to cut those dramatically from day one. And then they'll have the issue of, well, how much can we trim the IRA? And so they may come back and say, well, every provision has to have a cut of some sort. And even if it's just shortening the life, reducing it from 2032 to 2030 or something like that, that could save some money. They may look to try to do that on every tax credit, and then they may miss the mark in ways that reduce investment in this emerging sector.
So with all that information that we've just put out here in the last 40 plus minutes, let's move into some of the questions and answers that are coming in from the audience. And thank you, everybody. Drop your questions in the live chat. We're going to take some of these questions now and just bring them forward here. And I'm just going to pick one out, put it on the screen here. Do you see a paradigm shift in the tax credit and the liquidation, traditional tax, all that stuff? Where do you see this question impacting us? Anyone want to pick that one out?
Yeah, I can go, or Lauren can go. Lauren, why don't you go?
You go. You'll be more interesting. Go for it.
Thank you. Well, I mean, I think the IRA really unleashed a new source of capital that was lacking, and that really this industry deserves. The tax credit transfers, so long as the Congress doesn't take any ways to curtail those, will continue to flood the market, and that's more efficient. It gives a lot of opportunities to do interesting, somewhat marginally risky things, and those sort of things. It doesn't mean that the traditional tax equity route is going to close by any means, but if anything, I think this will open up new avenues. The only risk is, if there is a real reduction in the corporate income tax, then the companies who are going to have lower amount of tax liability, and therefore there could be natural contraction from that market. But I think the last 2 years have set up precedents, which is going to potentially unleash and really work towards the Republican agenda in terms of it kind of indirect way of doing the tax cuts anyway. So that kind of works out very well.
Well, I can ameliorate one of your concerns. We're not going to have a dramatic reduction in the corporate tax rate, maybe to get to 21 to 20. But for manufacturers, they may very well get a 15% rate.
As an investor, sorry to talk over, but as an investor, I need to be optimistic about the tax rates.
Yeah,
so I have a question actually, Russ, on that. In various of the online discussions I've seen about the IRA, I've heard it would be ridiculous and a waste of opportunity if we didn't take the opportunity to get rid of the IRA. These taxes, blah, 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 never belong to people. People who are attaching themselves to this industry are, rent seeking. They need to back off and blah, blah, blah. And I pose the question, I'm interested from a lobbyist point of view. If you take the position that tax credits are a bad thing versus the reduction in corporate tax rate for targeted groups of manufacturers like, domestic manufacturers, How does DC think about that? Because to me, if your position is you want to keep more of the taxes in the hands of the taxpayers and away from the government, then whether you reduce the corporate tax rate or you give a tax credit, are the two very different?
Well, you have winners and losers in the tax credit world, whereas if you just have a flat base and not many credits or deductions, then it's fair across the board. But look, Trump has been clear he wants lower tax rates on corporations across the board. But what does he want more? He wants more to have research and manufacturing occur in the U.S. And he's got a dramatic proposed combination of proposals. He's got tariffs that he says he's willing to impose dramatically across the globe in order to make it more expensive to import items, components, which would affect our industry as well. But he's also wants to encourage U.S. Manufacturing operations with this lower rate. And I think he's likely to get it if he pushes hard enough.
So let's go back to the
credits have been in the code forever, right? That is just how the U.S. has set up its tax system. So unless we're going to start from scratch, they're not going anywhere, right?
Yeah, and let me just give you the stories, which is Democrats tried to kill the 2001 tax credit bill and repeal it, and they were unsuccessful. And then Republicans tried to repeal the Affordable Care Act, and they were unsuccessful. You just don't pass big tax benefits to the American people and then come back and take it away from them. And the IRA has been in effect long enough that that's not going to happen broad-based. They're going to carve around the edges, except for maybe the EV tax credit.
So we've got a question from the audience out there exactly on this. Which tax credits do you think are most at risk?
Well, I said earlier, the EV tax credits, the refueling property tax credit, prevailing wage, and then the issue of how do we prevent China, subsidiaries of Chinese companies from claiming any of these credits. And I think those are the four most likely. I think the safest ones are the fossil fuel related ones, hydrogen, 45Q, and some of the ones we've talked about already, 45Z, but and everything else is kind of in the middle.
Anyone other thoughts on that and what's most at risk? And I'm sure
That's a good summary.
people.
Yeah, agreed.
So
my question would be, if you're actually running one of these businesses, right? So your business is, let's say you're managing EV fleets and chargers, right? That's your business. What are you looking at realistically? You've got a solid year for 2025, and then an effective date of, Jan 1, 26 that may put some crimp in your business model. How should people think about that kind of thing as
That's correct.
Business?
Yeah, that's what you're facing. And so what you do is you need to go find some Republican. You don't have to find many. Hopefully your state or of your business to the community, and you support them to be willing to speak up behind the scenes and say, hey, you can trim the IRA, but don't get rid of the refueling credit, and here's why. And if you get 3 or 4 members willing to take a stand like that, you can make a difference. We saw that with Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema in 2021 when the Democrats were trying to do a huge bill, and they said, no, we're not going to pass this. We're not going to raise all those taxes.
In other words, hire you, Russell, your colleague on the other
side.
Well,
only if you want the best,
Yeah, and then I would say, barring that, you would hire someone at V&E to grandfather your project in and make sure you've done enough to begin construction next year.
There you go.
The backup plan.
Here's another one for the viewer audience here today. What do you expect from Trump on trade for equipment needed for renewable and energy storage projects? Now they're really drilling down.
Not much sympathy. I think you're going to have to, get in there. You're going to have to, one, hope that he's doing what he's doing with Mexico and China right now, or Canada and Mexico right now, that he's really threatening tariffs, but he's really trying to use it to get those countries to actually do something on the immigration issue. and if they do it, then he'll back off. Well, if that's a good result for business that's concerned about the tariffs that might be applicable there. But I think he's more serious than that. I think he's going to come out with some that are more broad based, and I don't think he's going to just exempt full industries. Now, there are ways in the way tariffs work, that you can get an exemption if you qualify and go through the process correctly, but it takes some work. And so folks who do import a significant amount need to start planning.
Anyone else have thoughts on that?
Yeah, the only thing I would add is, we have a lot of clients that are obviously worried about the tariffs being imposed next year. Yeah. And so then it just becomes a commercial discussion of which party, if there's an investor coming in to invest in a project, are they going to bear any of that risk of the tariffs being imposed? And Santosh doesn't want to bear that risk, obviously, but it can be a really large dollar amount that the sponsor developer just may or may not be able to absorb. So lots of negotiations around that right now.
So here's a great. Oh, Neil, go for it. So
negotiations. When I hear tax lawyers saying lots of negotiations, I think that's going to be expensive. I just wonder whether there is a ton of negotiation going on around things like change of law and so forth, and who should bear that, and what kind of law changes are being discussed. Is that must have come up recently, right?
Oh yeah. I think most investors and even tax credit buyers are not willing to take any change in tax law risk, at least up until the time where they've made their full investment. That seems fairly universal. Once you're in a deal, whether you might kind of share some of that risk is a commercial point that is kind of negotiated between the parties. I've seen all flavors where investors may be willing to bear some of that risk, and others where they're looking for real, full protection and unwind.
So thinking of how this market got expanded through tax credits, it was a lot of corporate buyers who came in, and they basically said, we don't have to worry about the complexity of a tax equity partnership. We don't have to take project risk. We're just shaving cents off our tax rate. And it's pretty straightforward, 25 pages or whatever of a tax credit transfer agreement, easy. So suddenly you had a market exploding to 20 billion. I'm just wondering whether you're finding that those corporations are beginning to say, this is now beginning to feel a bit hard. Let's sort of step back a little bit, see how things are shaping up, or whether they're saying, hey, we're good for another few quarters here. We can continue to shave big chunks off our taxes.
So far, I think it's more of the latter. I think people continue to think that there's some runway for tax credit transfers. But back to the change in tax law point, they're not looking to take on that risk. So insofar as, the government completely unwinds the ability to transfer tax credit retroactively, they're going to be looking for their money back and for the deal to be unwound.
So here's a real interesting question, and it affects our relationship with our Canadian friends here. What do you think will be the impact on companies from Canada, which have business interests here in the States, given Trump's stance on the cross-border reforms? I mean, these are our best neighbors in the world. How do you think this is all going to impact? Lauren's smiling already.
I can't imagine that it will, but certainly not an expert on the area.
Yeah, we are taking the reverse route. I mean, we have operations in Canada, so actually it helps a little bit to diversify being in Canada at this time. But I think there might be some issues around the tariffs, but directly for owning the business itself, I don't see any particular real harm here or potential for real harm here.
I don't think there's going to be that big an issue on the tariffs for Canada. We had a long-time great relationship with Canada. Mm-hmm. Mr. Mulroney flew down to Mar-a-Lago, or has already met with Trump. So that part of it's okay. There is an issue on the cross-border tax issues, international taxation, where the U.S. Trump could take a tough stance against other countries who've imposed this global minimum tax. Canada is one of those that has. And if, in fact, he does that, that could cause some problems for investors from Canada into the U.S. But that debate hasn't really emerged yet.
Here's another one. We haven't really touched on this too much, but China is pulling ahead on the EV battery technology. How is Trump going to maybe handle that with the tariff situation now and staying competitive with the EVs? Any thoughts on that? Is he going to kill EV altogether, maybe?
Yeah, if you combine the tariffs as well as the potential reduction or repeal of the EV tax credit, that basically is going to be not necessarily death knell, but it's going to be curtailing the EV industry in the U.S. It's yet to be seen, though. I'm a born in optimist, so I always think that whenever renewable energy industry in general in the U.S. has been through a lot of ups and downs, there have been clamor around how XYZ is going to kill the industry, and it hasn't really. In fact, every time the industry has come out and grew much faster. So I believe that it will potentially cause reduction, but it's not going to materially change or kill the industry altogether. At the same, at some point, US has a competitive spirit as a whole, and therefore there will be other ways people will find a ways to be competitive again.
So our time is rolling down to end here. What I want to do here in the final moments is give each of you about 30 seconds to give a final thought that you want to put out to the audience. So you can throw out another question to tease the audience. You can give maybe your final thoughts on our collective conversation, but I'm going to start with Russ first and let you go. And what's your final thoughts as we've been together this hour?
Well, my final thought goes to what's going to happen this month, not to what's going to happen in January. I've talked to the Treasury Department and the White House. They're going to finalize the regulations under 45V for hydrogen, and they're also going to finalize the guidance under 45Y and 48E, the tech-neutral electricity tax credit. But they're not going to get the 45U nuclear guidance done, and they're only going to get partially done on the 45Z.
Russ, thanks for being with us here today. We'll just go backstage and take a break. Lauren, I'm going to come over to you, ask you the same thing. What's your final thoughts here?
Yeah, well, I love doing things with Russ because I figure out what I'm going to be doing for the next few weeks, which is apparently reading hundreds of pages of regulations. So I think that the final thought is just that, this is a time of some uncertainty and change, but this is where we get challenged, particularly as tax lawyers and workers in the project finance industry generally. I like what Santosh said. We're resilient. We find solutions to problems. And so, I think the best way to look at this is opportunity for growth and to do new and interesting projects.
Thanks for being a part of the panel here today. Santosh, I'm coming over to you now. What's your final takeaway from all our discussion?
I want to first claim a disclaimer that, whatever I've expressed are my personal opinions. So, nothing to attribute to my firm. But look, I've been in the industry for a long period of time, especially I've been doing, renewable energy projects since 2008 exclusively. I haven't done anything else. While there are some, headwinds in certain sectors, there will be tailwinds on other sectors, for example, nuclear, that could potentially lead to additional opportunities. And we have to be disciplined, and we have to look into all the positive signs that are coming out. This is going to be a mixed bag for renewable energy. It's not going to be fully positive or fully negative, and we'll have to just pick and choose the pieces and make the money work where it makes sense.
Thanks for being a part of our panel discussion here today. So, Neil, you were the guy that really came up with this whole idea to do this and bring this panel. What's your thoughts as we wind up?
So first of all, I want to thank all of the panelists who are so generous with their time and for showing up and for publicizing the event to their network. I'm very appreciative of that. I think it's a great time for energy, actually. Notwithstanding some of the challenges that we're getting from an IRA perspective, I think the focus of this administration on energy is tremendously encouraging for somebody who works in the energy sector. So that's sort of a parting shot. But I also want to say that I think we have a winner
Yes.
for our prize, which is one Pranjal Katawade. I hope I didn't butcher your name. And contrary to what Rich said at the outset, we can actually do slightly better than a digital version. I have here a book, the book itself, the physical book from Santosh, signed by Santosh, which if you reach out to me at contact@dakotaridgecapital.com, I will make sure that book finds its way to you. And thank you for participating in the Q&A and giving us all something to think about. And thanks to you, Rich, and to Krista, who's been working behind the scenes to curate all of our questions.
Well, thank you for being the sponsor of this and making it all possible. Again, the chat box was blowing up. The discussions were rich. And again, thank you for making it all possible.
Okay. Thanks, guys.
Everyone, have a great and wonderful day. Thanks for joining us for this live discussion panel. And we'll probably see you around next time. For now, I'm Rich Bontrager saying so long, good afternoon, and whatever part of the country, have a great